You probably remember the first time your bank account stopped feeling like bad news. Not rich, not financially free, just calmer. You open the app, see the number, and for the first time you realize one unexpected expense probably won't destroy your entire month. Most people think this feeling arrives at six figures, or maybe $1 million. It doesn't. There's a much smaller milestone where your relationship with money starts changing, around $20,000. Not because this amount makes you wealthy, it doesn't, but because it's often the first point where money stops being only a defense against emergencies and starts becoming a tool for building your future. Before this point, your financial life is dominated by one question, the same one, on repeat, no matter what's actually happening around you. How do I survive until the next paycheck? Every unexpected expense feels bigger than it should, because there's no margin between a problem and a crisis. But after you build a real cushion, that question quietly gets replaced by a different one. What can this money become? Because the difference between $5,000, $10,000, and $20,000 isn't just the amount sitting in your account, it's the amount of freedom your brain believes you actually have. And once it stops asking how to survive and starts asking what's possible, you're not just looking at numbers anymore. You're looking at options. In this video, we're going to break down why that shift usually happens around $20,000 and why most people never get there, even though it's much closer than they think. A friend sends a message in the group chat. A weekend trip. Nothing extravagant, just a few people getting together somewhere 2 hours away. You already know your answer before you even open the price breakdown. You type something about being busy that weekend. It isn't true. Everyone in the chat probably knows it isn't, but it's easier than saying the real reason out loud. A notification shows up on your phone. Your insurance premium is going up next month. You don't open it right away. You let it sit there, unread, because opening it means doing math you don't want to do tonight. Tomorrow, you tell yourself. Tomorrow arrives. You still haven't opened it. You've been unhappy at your job for over a year. The pay is mediocre. The manager makes it worse. And you've mentally checked out more times than you can count. But leaving means going a month, maybe two, without any income at all. And you don't have a month, let alone two. So you stay, not because it's the right decision, because it's the only one that feels survivable. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud. None of this is about being bad with money. It's about something much quieter than that. And it explains why two people earning almost the same amount can be living two completely different emotional lives. So why this number? Why not $5,000? Why not $50,000? $1,000 solves small problems. A flat tire, a late bill you forgot about, real relief, the kind that disappears in a single bad week. And you're right back to nothing, wondering where it went. $5,000 feels like an actual win. Right up until something bigger shows up. A real medical bill, a month without income. And you watch that progress get wiped out almost as fast as it took to build. $10,000 is usually where people start to relax, and they should. But underneath the relief, there's a thought running quietly in the background. If something big happens, I go right back to zero. But here's what's interesting. Somewhere around the next doubling, that thought finally goes quiet. Not because the number is special, not because life suddenly gets easier. It's because of something your brain has been measuring this entire time without you ever noticing it was keeping score. Every setback you've survived got filed away somewhere. How big the hit was, how long it took to recover, how close it came to breaking you completely. And somewhere around $20,000, something finally changes. For the first time in years, your brain stops assuming every problem could become a disaster. Not because you've become rich, because you've finally built enough distance between a bad day and a financial catastrophe. The bad luck required to knock you back down would now have to be bigger than almost anything you've actually lived through. That's the mechanism, not magic. Just enough distance between an ordinary bad day and an actual catastrophe that your nervous system stops treating the two as the same thing. This kind of milestone doesn't buy comfort. It buys something rarer, the right to be wrong once, without losing everything you built to get there. Picture two people, same unexpected expense, same exact number, $600. For the first person, that $600 doesn't just cost $600. It costs an extra shift picked up this week. It costs pulling out the credit card again, the one they promised themselves they wouldn't touch this year. It costs lying awake doing math that doesn't add up no matter how many times they run it. For the second person, that same $600 costs an afternoon of mild annoyance, a number that moves in an app. Then they go back to their evening like nothing happened because for them, nothing really did. Same expense, same dollar amount, completely different night. That's the part almost nobody talks about when they talk about savings. It was never really about the money sitting in the account. It's about what that missing cushion costs you beyond the number. The extra shift, the sleepless night, the small, quiet humiliation of asking someone for help you didn't want to ask for. Before a real cushion exists, every emergency taxes you twice, once in dollars, immediately, and once in time, energy, and peace of mind. The tax nobody puts on a receipt. After the cushion exists, an emergency only taxes you once. It becomes what it always should have been, an expense, not an event. But here's the part that's easy to miss. This isn't really an investing story yet. It's not about $600 growing into more money over time. It's something more immediate. The same bad luck at two different account balances costs two completely different amounts of your actual life. Most people measure financial progress in numbers going up. The real progress is quieter than that. It's an emergency that used to cost a week of stress now costing an afternoon of mild irritation and nothing more. Your savings were never really protecting your bank account. They were protecting your sleep, your relationships, your ability to show up normal at work the next day. Before, the question was always the same, no matter what decision was in front of you. Can I afford this right now? After, it becomes something else, almost without you noticing the switch. Where does this decision leave me a year from now? A job offer comes in. Before you take it almost on reflex, any income beats no income, and you can't afford to be picky when you don't know what next month looks like without it. The offer isn't really a choice at that point. It's a rescue. After you actually read it twice. You ask about growth, about the manager, about whether this is a real step forward or just a paycheck wearing a different name. Here's what's strange about that shift. Nobody sits you down and teaches you to ask these better questions. You don't wake up wiser one random morning. You just start being able to afford asking them. And the asking itself starts to feel overdue, like it should have always been there. Your lease is coming up for renewal. Before, the only math that mattered was whether the new number fit into what's left after everything else gets paid. After, a different question shows up. Does staying here actually move me forward, or does it just keep me comfortable in a way that's quietly costing me? A course, a certification, something that could genuinely raise what you earn. Before, it wasn't even a real option. That money was already spoken for by things that hadn't happened yet. After, it becomes a real decision, not automatic, but real. And here's the part that changes everything else in this video. Nothing about your income changed in any of these moments. What changed is the amount of room your brain has to think past tomorrow. Most people assume more money buys better decisions. It doesn't, not directly. What it buys is room. And room is what actually produces the better decision. Once you have that room, you stop reacting to your life, moving from one small emergency to the next. You start building it instead. There's a version of you that takes every job that comes along. Not because it's good work, not because the client is reasonable, but because saying no feels like a risk you can't afford. Picture someone who freelances for a living. A client reaches out with a project. The pay is low. The deadline eats into a weekend that was supposed to be theirs. Every instinct says this isn't worth it. But there's no cushion underneath them, and an uncomfortable yes still beats an empty calendar. So they say yes. They always say yes. Now picture the same person, 6 months later, with a real cushion sitting quietly in an account they don't touch. The same client reaches out with the same kind of offer. And for the first time, they actually pause before answering. They say, no, this isn't worth my time. I'll wait for the next one. That's the whole difference. Not the client, not the project. What changed is what happens in the silence between the offer and the answer. Without a cushion, silence is expensive. Every day you don't say yes to something is a day closer to a problem you can't outrun. So you fill the silence fast with whatever's in front of you. With a cushion, silence becomes something you can afford to sit inside. You can wait. You can let an offer sit for a day, and nothing catches fire while you think it over. Here's the mini revelation most people miss. An emergency fund doesn't just protect your bank account. It protects your ability to wait, which, it turns out, is the actual source of almost every good negotiation you'll ever have. People without that room end up selling almost anything at almost any price. People with it get to be selective, not because they're smarter, but because they built themselves enough room to actually choose, before every problem demanded today's version of you. A broken appliance had to be solved tonight. A surprise bill had to be paid this week. A bad job had to be tolerated because there wasn't enough time to look for a better one. When there's no cushion, money steals something that's much harder to replace than dollars. It steals time. Every decision becomes urgent. Every opportunity comes with a countdown. Every mistake needs to be fixed immediately. After a real emergency fund exists, something subtle changes. Problems don't disappear. Deadlines do. You don't have to solve everything today anymore. You have enough time to compare offers, enough time to negotiate, enough time to learn, enough time to recover from one mistake before making the next decision. People often think wealth gives you nicer things. Sometimes it does. But before it gives you nicer things, it gives you slower decisions. And slower decisions are surprisingly often the better ones. And once you've felt what it's like to say no and watch nothing collapse afterward, you don't go back to saying yes out of fear. You just don't need to anymore. The first $20,000 isn't valuable because of the money. That might sound backwards, given everything this video has said so far. But stay with it for a second, because this is the part that actually changes how the rest of your life gets built. Anyone can have $20,000 in an account for 100 different reasons: a bonus, an inheritance, a lucky year. What the first self-built $20,000 actually proves is something much harder to fake. That you're capable of building something from nothing, on purpose, over time, without giving up halfway through. Think about what that number actually required underneath the surface. Months, maybe years, of saying no to things you wanted in the moment. So, some future version of you could have something better. Nights where spending felt easier than not spending, and you chose not spending anyway. Before, the story you told yourself probably sounded like, "I'm just bad with money. It always disappears somehow." After, that story stops holding up because now you have evidence against it. Not a feeling. A number. Sitting in an account that exists specifically because you built it. Here's what's easy to overlook. The actual skill you built wasn't saving. It was tolerating discomfort on purpose for a future that wasn't guaranteed, with no immediate reward to make it feel worth it. That skill doesn't stay in your bank account. It follows you into every hard conversation, every long project, every moment where quitting would be easier than continuing. You'll notice it in strange places. In a difficult conversation you don't avoid anymore. In a goal that takes 18 months instead of 18 days that you stick with anyway. The money is just the visible part. The invisible part is that you now know with certainty instead of hope that you're someone who finishes what they start. Here's something almost nobody mentions about the day you finally reach the number. You check your account, the number is there, exactly where you planned it would be. And you wait for the feeling you thought would come with it. Mostly, what arrives instead is quiet. Not disappointment. Just less than expected. You spent months, sometimes years, working toward this moment. The moment itself lasts about as long as it takes to close the app. The shift is real, but it doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives a few weeks later when an unexpected bill shows up and you realize, almost as an afterthought, that you didn't panic. That's when you understand what actually changed. And that quiet gap between expectation and reality is where many people make their next mistake. Because when the number doesn't create the emotional payoff they imagined, they go looking for one somewhere else. A bigger apartment, a nicer car, a celebration. Some purchase that finally feels like success. But the number was never meant to give you a feeling. It was only meant to give you room. What you do with that room becomes the next chapter of the story. Before, money was fuel. It existed to be spent, and the only real question was whether spending it now felt good enough to justify doing it. After, money starts behaving differently in your head, almost without you deciding it should. It stops being fuel and starts being a tool. Picture an $800 purchase. Something nice, nothing crazy. Before, the only math that mattered was whether it fit into what's left this month. After, a second question shows up uninvited. What could this same $800 become if it just stayed where it was? This isn't about becoming someone who never spends anything, tracking every coffee, turning every purchase into a small act of self-denial. That version of frugality burns people out fast, and it usually doesn't even work for long. It's something quieter than that. It's just seeing both prices before you decide, instead of only ever seeing one. Because every purchase actually has two prices. The one on the receipt, and the one measured in what that same money could have quietly become if it had been left alone a little longer. Most people think an emergency fund protects your bank account. It actually protects your attention. It's what lets you notice that second price exists at all instead of only ever seeing the first one, the way you had to when survival was the only thing on your mind. Some purchases will still be worth it, even once you can see the second price clearly. A trip, a dinner with people you love. The difference isn't that you stop buying those things. The difference is you're choosing them on purpose, with your eyes open instead of on reflex. Not restriction, just visibility. Seeing clearly for the first time what a dollar could quietly become before you decide to let it become something else instead. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If this shift is real, why do so many people reach it and still end up back where they started? The danger was never getting here. The danger is what happens the week after. Because the moment that number finally shows up, something in you exhales for the first time in a long time. And relief has a strange side effect. It makes the thing you were relieved about feel finished, solved, behind you now, which is exactly the moment people quietly start treating a foundation like a finish line. Here's how it usually plays out. Someone hits their number, and almost immediately, life starts costing a little more. Not recklessly. A slightly nicer apartment because now you can. A car that's a step up. Financed over a few years because the payment fits. A few new small monthly costs, each one harmless on its own. The way a single snowflake is harmless on its own. None of these decisions look like mistakes in the moment. That's exactly what makes this the dangerous one. It never announces itself. It just quietly reroutes the same money that used to build toward something back into upkeep for a slightly bigger version of the life you already had. A year later, the number hasn't grown. Sometimes it's shrunk, and nobody can point to a single bad decision that caused it. It was never one decision. It was a dozen reasonable-sounding ones, each one small enough to justify on its own. Here's the distinction that actually matters. That first cushion was never a reward for what you survived to get there. It was a tool built for what comes next. Spending it down to celebrate arriving is like burning the ladder the moment you reach the landing. This doesn't mean living smaller forever, treating the number like something sacred you're never allowed to touch. It means understanding what it's actually for before you decide to use it. A cushion spent on an opportunity that grows it further is a tool doing its job. A cushion quietly drained by a slightly more expensive version of the same life is a tool being mistaken for a prize. The number itself doesn't know the difference. It just goes up or it goes down. Only you know which one you're actually choosing in the moment you're choosing it. At some point in this video, a thought probably crossed your mind. Easy for someone else to say. Maybe your rent already eats half your paycheck. Maybe you're paying off medical bills that never seem to disappear. Maybe you're trying to build savings for an entire family, not just yourself. That's a fair thought. The road isn't the same for everyone. Some people reach this point in 2 years, others need 10. Some never had the same starting line to begin with, but none of that changes what this milestone actually represents. The mechanism behind this shift doesn't care how you got there. It only cares how much distance exists between today's problems and tomorrow's survival. For some people, that number might really be around $20,000. For someone with lower expenses, it might happen much earlier. For someone carrying far greater responsibilities, it might require much more. The exact number is different for everyone, but the moment is always the same. One day, almost without noticing it, your mind stops asking, "How do I survive this month?" and quietly starts asking, "What can I build next?" That's the moment this entire video has been about. Go back to the beginning of this video for a second. Not the number, the feeling. That message in the group chat, the weekend trip 2 hours away. Before, you typed something about being busy and everyone probably knew it wasn't true. Now picture answering that same message from the other side of this number. You don't calculate anything, you just say yes because yes is actually true this time. That insurance notification you let sit there, unread. Now you open it the moment it arrives. Not because the number is smaller, because the math doesn't scare you anymore, whatever it turns out to be. That job you stayed in because leaving meant a month, maybe 2, with no income at all. Now that same math looks different. You could leave. You probably won't do it recklessly, but the fact that you could changes how you sit in every meeting, how you speak in every one-on-one, whether you ask for what you're actually worth or quietly settle for less out of fear. Nothing about any of these situations changed on paper. Same friend, same insurance company, same job. What changed is you. Specifically, the amount of fear standing between you and an honest answer. Remember the question from the beginning, how do I survive until the next paycheck? Somewhere along the way, without you marking the exact day it happened, that question got quietly replaced by another one. What can this become? This was never really a video about $20,000. It only sounds like it was. It's about the exact point where a number stops being something you're chasing and starts being something you're standing on. Solid enough that you can finally look up instead of down. $20,000 doesn't buy financial freedom. It doesn't buy luxury. It doesn't make every hard decision easy. And it definitely doesn't solve every problem sitting in your life right now. But it buys the one thing that quietly touches everything else. The space to decide instead of react. Wealth was never really about the size of the number. It's about the moment your decisions stop being made by your bank account and start being made by you. If this made you see your own number differently, that's really the only thing this video was ever trying to do.